just introduce myself first. So Ed Petrovaki, Sourcing Operations Manager at Hydro One. Recently, we implemented Ariba and Fieldglass last year, and I don't know if how many of you are actually here, probably most of you for Ariba Live. So we'll be talking a little bit more about the Ariba presentation tomorrow. So today we're going to be focusing purely on Fieldglass and kind of the transformation and how we came to get there. Just talking a little bit about Hydro One. So Hydro One is primarily a transmission and distribution company for electricity. We own 98% of the transmission grid in Ontario. We deliver electricity to about 1.4 million customers in the province of Ontario, and covering about 75% of the rural area. If you think about Ontario, it's about 1 million square miles. It's about one and a half times the size of Texas. So when you think about the diverse area that we operate in, the need for external services is critical for operation. So it really is critical in the sense that we need to be able to properly engage with our suppliers and engage with them in tools that we know that we're confident in that will be user-friendly for us and user-friendly for them as well. So some of the challenges that we faced before we started on this journey, essentially a lack of transparency. So whenever we would engage with service providers in the past, it would be really at a high level. So from a procurement standpoint, it meant simple purchase orders with not a lot of information, not a lot of details. What that meant was when we got those invoices back, we didn't have a lot of detail assigned to those. So it was difficult in terms of figuring out how much did we actually spend and what was the detailed spend. So just this not being able to have full visibility on our actual purchases. From a high level of manual touches and automation, every single type of engagement with the service provider, whether it was contingent labor, whether it was a statement of work, required procurement involvement. That meant a buyer needed to process that, they needed to review it, and they needed to also handle any change requests. So while we had a good handle on the material masters side of things on the materials spend, we had good automation there, but on the services we had really a lack of automation there. From a compliance standpoint, it's really looking at challenges around how do we know that the suppliers are actually invoicing us to those contracts that we put in place? How do we know that we're getting the rates that we actually negotiated? So it was really difficult to actually say, and when we had our end users, even if they knew which suppliers they were actually engaging with or which ones we had contracts with, they weren't actually aware with what the actual rates were. So in terms of validating that, the contract compliance wasn't there. And then just from a usability standpoint, inefficient use of the actual user interface on how we are actually going out to requisition. Our users used a dated SAP platform to be able to requisition, and sometimes it wasn't that user-friendly. I think maybe some of you are probably familiar with that. And so, that was kind of one of the things. How do we make it easy for our end users to interact with the tool and interact with our suppliers? And then the costly maintenance of our systems. So when I say that, it's not just about the actual costs of upgrading the systems and doing testing and all that, but it's also the deployment. So when you think of a traditional ERP platform where you have a rigid system in place, you're limited on what you can do. And any changes, you need to involve IT, and there's a lot of project funding that you have to actually have in order to make those changes. So we needed something where we could actually deploy faster and more efficiently from a cost perspective. So when we started the transformation, we started it in 2015. We essentially took a look at our existing technology. We had some systems that were coming to end of life, and we were asking ourselves, is this the right technology, or what else is there? So we actually engaged the services of SAP in their value lifecycle program to take a look at what else was out there. But ultimately, kind of our objectives were really around four aspects. Simplify. So how do we get our end users connected with the suppliers and removing supply chain as being a bottleneck? As I mentioned, there was a lot of manual touches. So how do we simplify and streamline that process? The second was around control, as I mentioned, the contract compliance control, and then the reportability. So how do we ensure that we're getting the proper control on our tools? And then thirdly, we had a category management framework that we wanted to implement. So it wasn't enough that we just put the technology in place, but we also wanted to ensure that that technology, in the context of the overall transformation from the organization and from our process, that it was the right fit. So we've seen in the past where trying to put in technology in the place of a broken process or an organization that's not set up to support the business will ultimately fail. And then finally, we saw a lack of supplier relationship, both from a supplier relationship management as well as having key strategic relationship with some of those big suppliers. So we wanted to broaden that program, and we wanted to put tools in place that made it easy to interact with those suppliers and also drove essentially mutual benefits for both of us. So how do we get there? In 2015, we embarked on that business case, as I mentioned. We engaged the help of SAP. They did an assessment. So they compared us with our peers in the industry. They looked at other utilities, they looked at other companies, and they looked at what technologies were out there, what technology was on their roadmap, and what were we using today, and then in terms of how we ranked up. So that quickly identified some key areas of opportunity that we wanted to focus on. And then in terms of the technology, what were some of those key platforms that we should be looking at? So by using that program, we then, in 2016, embarked on a discovery. So we did an 8-week discovery. We partnered with Accenture at the time, and we looked at essentially broadening essentially the business case to include not just the technology, but the actual, as I mentioned, the category management transformation, and some of those other pieces. So they helped us really hone in on a couple things. So what were the actual business case benefits? What was the actual organization that we needed to support that? And then how do we get there? So what did the implementation roadmap look like? And that kind of combined to form the business case that we went for approval in late 2016, and we ultimately got that approval and started the project in 2017. It's important to note with that business case, it's not just us working with IT, it's the line of business. So we did a lot of stakeholdering. We asked questions to the VPs and directors of the business, what was most important to them and how can supply chain support them. So in doing that stakeholdering, getting their buy-in and getting their input, that helped us drive kind of what really we wanted to implement. So again, it's not just the technology, it was also about the process. So talking specifically about our actual Fieldglass rollout, it really kind of, we took a look at 4 factors when we were determining what categories we wanted to focus on. The first being, the easy one is spend. How much do we spend in a specific category? A lot of our business case was tied to that spend, and again, the compliance tied to that spend. So the more we spent, the higher the expected benefit we were supposed to get. The second was the number of suppliers or the number of users in that category. The higher the number, the more the change management effort. And then thirdly, it was really looking at, in terms of the actual number of services that they provide. So when you look at those factors, the first one that we looked at was the IT group. So from a contingent labor, most of the IT contractors are run through that program management office, and the timesheeting process was very inefficient. So there was a high line of business readiness, and that was really the fourth factor. Was the line of business ready to receive it? So the timesheeting process was built in Excel. It was difficult to maintain, and they were eager to get onto something new. The next rollout was with the Lines and Forestry Group, and that was on what we call our general contracting services. So you think about our Ontario, and we think about the work that we do, it's out in the field. High number of transactions, a few number of suppliers, but a lack of compliance, a lack of ability to see what those prices were, and a lack of automation. So there was a key push to get them on as well. And then construction services as part of the 6 to 9 month rollout. Again, this is out in the field, but this was focused more on our major construction projects. Think about, heavy machinery, things like cranes and so on. So again, this was similar to general contracting services, except there was a high amount of suppliers here. So we put them towards the end because there was a bigger change management. So it was kind of a balancing exercise really across those 4 factors to figure out where we really wanted to focus our efforts. And I mentioned earlier that the rollout was based on the context of our overall category management framework. So it's not just the project putting and rolling out technology, it's really in the context of what's the business doing, what's supply chain doing from a category management, looking at each category and figuring out, is this the right time to roll out Fieldglass to those business units? So we're still working on that. We're in the 9-12 months phase right now, working with facilities, but we've got plans for some of our other business units. And just to put it in context, we've got about $1.5 billion procurement spend. About 60% of that is material, about 40% of that is in services. So what benefits did we see? The first one, I think, is the most obvious one, is the cost. And we talked a little bit earlier around the ability to rapidly deploy. So what we found with Fieldglass is the ability to actually configure a solution, speak with an actual business unit, and then determine what their needs are, and then figure out how best to deploy them and configure the solution with minimal IT involvement. So that's a huge cost savings for us, not having to constantly engage IT whenever we need to make a change. It was a big win. Not to mention the obvious infrastructure savings just from being a cloud solution. The second was around efficiency. So we talked about the automation. We're seeing a lot of automation when it comes to being able to connect the end users directly with the supplier. That means no revisions required by a procurement buyer. That means that we're actually putting in rules in place where above certain dollar values, it comes to procurement, but below certain dollar values, the business can work with the suppliers directly. So we're seeing a huge amount of efficiency there. On the approvals side, we're actually able to see a couple of new approvals from mobile apps that we didn't have before, and emails. Traditionally, we would have all of our approvals happen within the SAP tool directly, and now people can be mobile and do those approvals. So we're seeing a lot of efficiencies there. And then I keep going back to the compliance, because that's such a huge part of our business case, is being able to ensure that now we have the tool in place to take the contracts that we have and the rates that we have, put that into Fieldglass, and then have confidence that when suppliers invoice us, that they're going to be invoicing us to what we've actually negotiated. We also have confidence that our users, because we've trained them and the tool is easy to use, that we know that they're going to be using suppliers only that we've contracted with, only that we've approved, right? And Fieldglass gives you that control. And we don't have to constantly audit it and constantly manage it, because we know that the tool does such a great job of doing that for us. And finally, from a visibility, having full visibility into our headcount. So we've had, traditionally good visibility into our regular headcount, but contingent labor was something difficult. We didn't know how long contractors were on for us. We didn't know what we were spending with them. And it was difficult to know actually how many contractors we had in total, right? And so Fieldglass really uncovered that and gave us that full visibility. And I'll say that the reporting data that we're getting from Fieldglass is tremendous. And being able to get to that really granular level of detail on all of our spend for services is really key, because it's key for our end users being able to report on that data. It's key for our suppliers as well, because they see that same level of data and are able to use it for their own purposes. But that was really a key benefit for us. And so I'll kind of wrap it up with kind of what our objectives are for this year and beyond. It kind of really centers around 3 main objectives. The first is the integration, and I think I heard a couple people talking about this, and I know SAP is doing a lot of work with this, but we're an SAP shop, so we have SuccessFactors, we have Ariba, we have Fieldglass, we have the core SAP module. It's really looking at how those pieces integrate well with each other. So for Fieldglass and Ariba, I'll use that as an example. We have a lot of contracts formed in Ariba, but then bringing them over to Fieldglass has proved a challenge. So we're looking to potentially improve the integration there. I believe success factors in Fieldglass is something that we haven't yet integrated, but I believe that works well, and so that's one of our objectives on the integration piece. The second is really around getting our addressable spend within Fieldglass. So we have a target of between 40 and 50% of all of our addressable services spend in the tool by end of this year. And then within the next couple of years, we're targeting between 2/3 and maybe 75% of our addressable services spend within the tool. And then finally, it's really discovering more of the Fieldglass tools. We've only been on it for a year, so when I hear companies that have been on it for 10 years or so, there's a lot that we can learn about the tool. So we want to be able to leverage some of the new functionalities, such as some of the SAL bidding, SAL worker functionality that we're not using today, but we're hearing that we can get a lot of benefit from. So that's kind of what our objectives are for this year and beyond. So with that said, that was our journey.